It's official. Nintendo is quietly slashing production of the Switch 2 by 30% this quarter, and according to people directly familiar with this decision, the reason is simple. American demand for the Switch 2 kind of collapsed over the holidays, and honestly, this shouldn't come as a surprise either, since Nintendo's own president admitted on their earnings call that, quote, overseas sales were weaker than expected, end quote. Those are his words, not mine. Now, I first reported on weak Switch 2 holiday sales back in January, so I have patiently waited 2 months to say I told you so, but because I'm so humble and kind, I will refrain. But this news will be shocking to a lot of Nintendo fans who haven't really been paying attention lately. With the recent success of Pokemon Pokopia and the massive demand for the Switch 2 in Japan specifically, on the outside it looked like everything was going super well. Internally, however, poor Switch 2 sales in the USA made Nintendo realize that the reality was very different. Combine that with tariff pressures, AI competition for vital components, a weak software lineup, and a poor economy, and Nintendo has a very challenging year ahead of it. So today, let's jump in and figure out exactly what just happened, starting with this article shared by the Japan Times. Nintendo cuts Switch 2 output by over 30% on weak holiday sales. Now, I don't want to insult your intelligence, so if you guys just want to read this article, I will link to it in the description. I always link my sources down below, but as somebody who literally predicted this months ago, I do have a lot to say, so if you are curious, stay tuned. The article says Nintendo is cutting back the production of Switch 2 after demand for the $450 gaming console trailed the company's expectations during the year-end holiday season, particularly in the United States. The company plans to make 4 million units of its flagship device this quarter, a third less than the 6 million it had originally planned to produce, people familiar with the matter said. The reduced output rate is set to continue in April, the people said, asking not to be named as the figures aren't public. Of course, whenever serious internal decisions like this get leaked, of course we're not going to have a name attached here, but this is one of the things where, like, when you look at all of the readily available sales data from this past holiday season, everything in this article lines up perfectly. There are no coincidences here. This is what happened, and now Nintendo and the rest of the gaming market are finally starting to realize the current reality of the Switch 2 in the United States, at least, because it is still massively successful in Japan, and overall the Switch 2 is still very successful. After a record-setting debut in June, sales of the Switch 2 have failed to meet Nintendo management's high expectations. Again, these are not my words or my opinion, okay? This is just what is actually being reported at this point in time based on the sales data. Hi Tiger, how are you? Are you looking for a treat again? Look who came to say hi. I know a lot of you guys were missing Tiger in my last video. She thinks she's gonna get treats. I'll give her a couple of treats later if you guys drop a like on the video. Isn't that right, Tiger? She gets treats anyway. Though demand for a lower priced but unprofitable variant in Japan has remained strong, sales in the US haven't met with similar continued success. It's crazy that these news publishers are finally catching up to the reality of the Switch 2 literally like 2 or 3 months later, because of course this was reported on over on Kotaku. It was also reported on over on Polygon, right? And at some point these gaming news outlets were going to be forced to face the reality, despite them benefiting from access journalism and despite them having every financial incentive to say really good things about Nintendo. Eventually the numbers are just the numbers, right? And so when I talked about this back in January, everyone hated on me, but now here we are, everyone's kind of forced to capitulate because it just is what it is, right? And here's the thing, this is the part that's so frustrating, is like people are going to watch this video and they're going to think, oh well, the Switch 2, it's the fastest selling console ever, so this is all BS. And it's like, these are not mutually exclusive things. You can have the fastest selling console of all time besides the Game Boy Advance, of course. We conveniently forget about that one just to make sure the Switch 2 still sounds really good. And you can also have slow holiday sales in the United States, right? Like these two things can coexist, and as a matter of fact, they literally are. That is literally what is happening. The Switch 2 is still technically the fastest selling home console ever at this point in time, and demand for the Switch 2 in the United States has kind of collapsed over the last few months. That's actually what's happening right now, which is why I'm making this video, because I think that's really an interesting development. The Switch 2 had a super successful launch, and then things slowed down as much as they have, at least in the United States. Clearly the Switch 2 is still doing well in Japan, but let's continue on with the article and see what they have to say. A successful launch of of the Switch 2 title Pokemon Pokopia, which sent Nintendo shares soaring this month, that's not oh yikes, that's actually not true. We'll talk about that. Hasn't prompted the management to again accelerate production of the device. Instead, it's waiting to see if the hit game and other new titles have enough staying power to merit an output increase, the people said. Now, the reason I said that the stock hasn't been soaring is because if we just do a quick fact check, right, even since yesterday the stock is down like 6%, right? And like obviously it's because of this news, that's a big portion of it, but I mean really when you say soaring, it just, the stock went back up to like its 6-month lows, right? Like that's not soaring, that's like recovering from a massive dip down, and it couldn't even hold it, right? It's immediately lost it in the last 5 days. I mean, look at that, look at this absolute collapse. I know Nintendo fanboys hate when I use that word, but I mean, like, objectively, what other word am I supposed to use? Like this is a vertical cliff. Like what that's what happened here. Okay, so anyway, sending shares soaring is not exactly accurate. Yes, it did get a little bit of bump of optimism from Pokemon Pokopia, and rightfully so. Pokopia sold very well as far as we can tell. We don't have that much sales data, but it sold over 2 million units in 4 days, and like there's no reason to assume that it didn't sell well. Of course it sold well, right? And by the way, I said it would sell well in my video. A lot of people seem to think that I like predicted Pokopia would be a flop. I literally said that I thought that it would sell as well as Legends EA, which I don't think it has sold as well as Legends EA yet, but of course we don't have all the numbers, but I did say I would not be surprised if it was that successful. Okay, so again, this is one of those things where I'm always fighting with this false narrative that people just hallucinate because they just look at my titles and thumbnails and get mad at them, and then they don't actually watch the video, right? Which is like, that's why the Nintendo community is so unbearable and the rest of the gaming community doesn't engage with them at all. But anyway, the article goes on to say the output cut shouldn't affect Nintendo's ability to meet the average analyst estimate of about 20 million Switch 2 units sold in the fiscal year through this month, they said. Of course, I think everybody kind of knows that they're going to hit that number, but the Switch 2 also faces cost pressures, including rising memory chip prices that has hit electronics manufacturers across the planet. While the higher semiconductor cost has led Nintendo to consider raising the device's price, as reported last month, we'll talk about that in a second, it hasn't played a role in the decision to curb output. And that's a very important line right there. The production cuts are driven by slower demand from consumers, the people said, and they're quoting here, people directly familiar with this matter internally. Okay, and the reason that this is important is because this is going to be one of those things where a lot of people are going to run to Nintendo's defense, as they do, as if they're getting paid to do so, which some of them are. They benefit from access journalism and they benefit from YouTube ad revenue to say everything's really good for Nintendo, right? But the truth is that there is literally one specific reason that was provided for this production cut. It's not a chip shortage, it's not a RAM shortage, it's not tariffs, it's not the war in the Middle East, right? Like they quite literally directly say that the production cuts are driven by slower demand from consumers, which is why I feel so vindicated making this video, because again, I said this like 2-3 months ago and I thought I was like drinking crazy juice for these past few months, wondering how nobody else sees it, and here we finally are. Okay, Nintendo representatives didn't respond to a request for comment. Of course they didn't. The weaker than expected momentum may push Nintendo to take steps to spur demand, such as introducing new hardware variations. I really hope they do this, honestly. A console's second year on the market is critical to establishing long-term platform success, as a growing user base attracts developers and creates a virtuous cycle that draws in more players. I really think the Switch 2 would benefit from a lower cost option, which is going to be very challenging right now, considering they already don't have an OLED screen, right? So they already kind of have cut corners with the quality of the display, which by the way, I still think the display looks really good, but it's not OLED, right? Like it's just not OLED. And also, of the people that I've talked to who have a Switch 2, and just from my own personal experience, the Switch 2 is pretty heavy as a portable device. So I do think that if Nintendo was able to produce a Switch 2 Lite, which could literally just be a smaller Switch 2 that's portable only, maybe with less memory, category, right, and at a lower price point, maybe at like $349 or something like that, I think a lot of people would be really interested in that, because I know a lot of people that want to get the Switch 2 for Pokopia specifically, but they don't want to spend $500. But maybe they would spend $350 if they knew that they could get a cheaper, more portable option that's a little bit lighter, a little bit smaller, fits in more bags, things like that, right? And also, we've got Pokemon Wind and Waves coming at the end of 2027. I think that would be a slam dunk opportunity for them to release a Switch 2 Lite around the time of Pokemon Winds and Waves launching, or maybe ahead of time in advance or something. That way there is a lower price option for a majority of consumers to choose if there's only a handful of games that they want and they can't afford the $500 option. You guys can let me know what you think about that in the comment section below. I do think that it's a little bit early for them to be releasing a cheaper light variant, but at the end of the day, like, you need to do something to push up demand, and I think a lower price would really go a long way. And the evidence for that is that the Switch 2 is selling really well in Japan, and it's literally $120 cheaper than the United States. We'll talk about that in a second. With 17.37 million units sold last year since its June 5th launch, Switch 2 is the most successful hardware debut in Kyoto-based Nintendo's history. Yet doubts persist about the Mario Bros. Creator's ability to produce games that keep consumers shelling out for its game console, with competition intensifying from rivals such as Sony. And that's a huge bullet point here that I don't want to jump over, because in 2026 we are still expecting Grand Theft Auto 6 to launch on console, and right now at the time of recording this, we do not have any reliable evidence that Grand Theft Auto 6 will be coming to Switch 2 on day one. It might come later down the line. I think it's pretty likely it will come later down the line, but I think it's unlikely to launch at the same time as the PlayStation 5 and Xbox versions, especially because it still seems to be the case that the PC version of Grand Theft Auto 6 is not going to be coming at launch either. So there's no reason to expect the Switch 2 to get GTA 6 as well. And even if it does, right, let's just say that they are able to pull that off, right, the definitive and best place to play Grand Theft Auto 6 is obviously going to be on the Xbox or PlayStation 5, because they are simply more powerful pieces of hardware. It just is what it is. The article goes on to say Nintendo has acknowledged softer demand. President Shuntaro Furukawa said on a February 3rd earnings call that, quote, overseas sales were somewhat weaker than expected, end quote. Japan outperformed expectations, helped by a domestic variant priced at 50,000 yen, which is about $324. For those of you that don't know, in the United States it is $450 for just the base model, no game. So again, when we look at the success of the Switch 2 in Japan, there's no way that we can have that conversation without actually acknowledging that the console is significantly cheaper in Japan than it is in the rest of the world, especially the United States. It's 27% cheaper, in fact. Like, that is a huge discount. How many of you that don't have a Switch 2 would consider buying one if you could get one for $324? I mean, that is a massive price reduction, right? Many of you will still not want one, but a lot of you will. A lot of people would spend $325, but they won't spend $450, especially with tax and the price of games being $60, $70, $80 sometimes. People in the US just aren't spending that kind of money right now for a console that has at most 3 really solid games that are exclusive: Mario Kart World, Donkey Kong Bonanza, and now Pokemon Pokopia. In fact, 2 weeks ago I actually had a meeting with game developers, and this is going to be like a trust me bro thing, because obviously I can't reveal any more than that, but one of their questions that they had for me was just kind of inquiring about the current state of the gaming market in the United States and my perspective on why people have been spending less money on video games, right? So like, the Nintendo fans can sit on YouTube and Twitter all day and pretend like everything is super fine, but all the adults in the room are having serious conversations about spending habits of consumers dropping across the board when it comes to entertainment, right? And like, look, when there's a bad economy, the first thing to go is the spending that makes the least amount of sense, right? And so people, yes, they will still spend on entertainment, but they're going to spend less. Okay, so instead of buying a Switch 2 and getting the new games and everything, maybe they'll just get Legends EA for the Switch 1. They're still spending money on entertainment, but the value proposition has to really be there for consumers to open their wallet, which is why, and I said this in my last video, Apple just dropped their brand new MacBook Neo for $599. It is the best value MacBook that they've ever released. Is it the strongest? No. Is it the most flashy? No. Does it have the best screen? Absolutely not. But it has the best value. You get the most most for your dollar. And that's what consumers are looking for right now. And that's why successful companies like Apple are providing cost-effective alternatives for consumers that don't have thousands and thousands of dollars to buy a MacBook Pro. Nintendo should really be gearing up to do the same thing here, because MacBooks, you know, they are a luxury, but they also can be used for work. A Switch 2 is purely entertainment, and the value proposition for a lot of people is not there. Now, some people it is there. Some people love their Switch 2 and they're having a blast with it, and they can't understand why everyone else is kind of sitting on the sidelines waiting, but a lot of people are, because they don't want to spend the money. The article goes on to say a setback during the holiday season was the December release of Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, the latest installment in one of Nintendo's most popular US franchises. The title sold fewer than 1 million copies that month, a rare sluggish debut for a major Nintendo release. Now, I do want to just stop and say that there was one sort of leak, kind of trust me bro report that came out that said if you added up the Switch 2 and Switch 1 sales for Metroid Prime 4, then it would have converted to over 1 million copies sold. I don't think we have any definitive proof of that yet. I haven't looked too much into it, but I don't know of a credible source that has actually reported that. Maybe they have and I just missed it, not really sure, but I do just want to at least mention that here. First announced in 2017, the game underwent a lengthy development process aimed at ensuring quality, and yeah, we all kind of know how that went. The game was just kind of fine. Consumers were just like, yeah, it's not really a Metroid Prime game, it's fine, but it's nothing spectacular. Shares of Nintendo fell 40% in the 6 months to mid-February as concerns over its titles and Switch 2's long-term success intensified. This month, the stock has recouped some of the losses after Pokemon Pokopia proved a hit, selling more than 2 million units in just 4 days. Yeah, it recouped like 5%, 4%, like very little. It's not much at all, really. And I don't even think it's been able to sustain that, as we saw from the stock price earlier. Nintendo typically begins each fiscal year with a conservative hardware sales forecast and revises it upward as momentum builds, particularly after the third quarter, which captures the crucial year-end shopping season. For the current fiscal year through March, the company initially projected sales of 15 million Switch 2 units and raised that target to 19 million in early November following the strong launch. But Nintendo left the forecast unchanged when it reported third quarter earnings in February, a point in the cycle when it had historically increased guidance if performance is in line with the internal plan. Now, it could be the case that they bumped up their projection earlier because the demand was pulled forward earlier. That's totally possible. So again, I don't want to pretend like they didn't increase their forecast. They absolutely did. But the article is saying that historically, by this point, they would be moving up that forecast again if things were going as planned, and they didn't, right? So that is the point that they're trying to make here. That decision suggests sales may have fallen short of expectations during the holiday period. The 19 million unit goal also appears cautious relative to analysts' average estimate of about 20 million devices sold. While the revised production plan would still allow Nintendo to meet those estimates, the decision to scale back output suggests the company had previously been preparing for stronger demand than it is now experiencing. The company is analyzing the slowdown but remains confident in the console's long-term projections, the people said. One internal debate centers on whether ample inventory in the weeks and months after the Switch 2's release may have brought forward demand that would otherwise have materialized later in the year. I think surely that is part of this, right? The war in the Middle East is set to add logistic hurdles and expenses for exporters such as Nintendo. Such expected delays may cause Nintendo to again increase its Switch 2 output. The company plans to start selling a new battery replaceable variant in Europe in the next fiscal year, and it wants to make sure adequate quantities will be available in a timely manner, they said. And this is something that I haven't touched on, but yes, it has been revealed that in Europe, Nintendo may be forced to produce a Switch 2 version that has a replaceable battery, and by that they mean consumer replaceable. So you don't have to send it in anywhere, you don't have to bring it anywhere, you as the consumer can do it yourself. I think that would be fantastic, and frankly, if they go through all the trouble of making that, they might as well just bring it to the rest of the world and get some good boy points and get some goodwill for it, right? Now, I also want to quickly touch on what Kotaku has reported here, because they do have some really interesting insights as well. They said right ahead of the holiday season, console sales flatlined across the board, having previously outsold the original Switch beat for beat. The Switch 2 suddenly lagged far behind across its first Christmas, a full 35% lower in the United States. While there's no clear explanation, it's thought likely to be a combination of a tougher economy, the significantly higher prices of consoles thanks to said economy and Trump's tariffs, and the lack of a big new game to push Switch 2s out the door. Without a new Zelda, no mainline Pokemon, and the continued bizarre absence of a major Mario title for the device, there's a sense that the Switch 2 is just a bit bit less essential. And I think that that is absolutely true. And even Nintendo fans are starting to feel this pressure. And this is abundantly clear with the number of Nintendo Direct rumors that have been flying around YouTube for the past, like, I don't know, 2 months at this point. Every Nintendo YouTuber under the sun every couple of weeks comes out with a new rumor, a new lie about a new Nintendo Direct right around the corner. And we saw that recently with the apparently a new Mario game was going to be announced in February, and surprise surprise, we're at the end of March and still nothing. And the reason that Nintendo fans are so desperate for any crumb of news about new Nintendo Directs is because there's really not much to play on the Switch 2 besides Pokopia right now. And it's been nearly 3 weeks since Pokopia's release, and for a game that has about 30 to 40 hours of content, I would know I beat the game. People are starting to finish the game right now. I know there's really no finishing it, but if you're only there to progress through the different zones and see what the game has to offer, you're gonna be putting down Pokopia pretty soon unless you're hardcore into that genre and assuming that you haven't already put it down. And without a Nintendo Direct, we don't really know what the next big game is. There's a Yoshi game that they had more news come out for recently, and a lot of people kind of just scratched their head when they saw it because they're like, oh, okay, this isn't gonna be like Mario Odyssey for Yoshi. It's not gonna be the DK Bonanza of Yoshi, right? It's like a Yoshi story game, and that's fine. And there's a demographic and niche for that, but it's not a system seller. You know it, I know it, everybody knows it. We also know that the mainline Pokemon games, Wind and Waves, were pushed back to 2027. And I say pushed back, even though technically they were never revealed for 2026, but the Terra Leak proved that a lot of internal documents were aiming for a 2026 holiday release. That never happened, and we're getting a 2027, which is fine. I mean, having the game cook for a bit longer is probably what Pokemon really needs, but that was supposed to be, at least for Nintendo fans, the light at the end of the tunnel. That was the thing that was going to sell consoles in 2026 and give them a reason to pick up the console again. And also, we don't have a Mario game coming down the pipeline. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be one, of course, but we don't know what it actually is. Mario Wonder with Bella Bell Park is coming out pretty soon, and like, people are probably not going to buy a Switch 2 for that. I mean, frankly, it doesn't even make sense that the DLC is Switch 2 exclusive, considering the game literally is on Switch 1. Why is Bella Bell Park not on Switch 1? You literally can do it. The game runs on Switch 1 already. It's insane that they're putting that on Switch 2 exclusively. But anyway, I'm pretty sure we still don't know when Dusk Bloods is coming out, and we also don't have a release date for Splatoon. We don't have a release date for Fire Emblem, I don't think. So really, unless you wanted Pokopia, you still don't have a reason to buy a Switch 2 right now, and you don't even have a reason coming down the pipeline in the near future. And that's not even to talk about Zelda. Where's Zelda? Where's Smash Bros? We know Smash Bros is delayed because of Kirby Air Riders, right? All of these big games feel so far away, and maybe they're not, but we don't know for sure because Nintendo's not saying anything. Kotaku goes on to say, America disappoints. It really does seem to be the United States that is especially hurting Nintendo. Again, welcome to the party. I've been saying this for months now. Sales in Japan are very strong, demand often exceeding supply, and while Europe isn't overperforming, it's not particularly below hopes either. But the US just doesn't seem to have the expected love for the console sequel, the PS5 continuing to outperform the Switch 2 despite being 6 years old and not exactly overwhelmed by its own exclusives, right? And this is one of the things where over the holidays, a lot of the fanboys really rushed to Nintendo's defense, and they're like, oh, the only reason that the PS5 beat the Switch 2 in November is because they had massive discounts. And it's like, first of all, the discount was just bringing the console down to the price that it was at launch, which means the PS5 launch price remained unchanged in the last like 6 years, okay? And two, as was reported back in February, the PS5 is still outselling the Switch 2, okay? So last I checked, the price cuts are not still in effect for the PS5, okay? And this data comes directly from Matt Piscatella of Circana. He posted 4 days ago that the PlayStation 5 again led the hardware market in both unit and dollar sales. Switch 2 repeated its January performance, ranking second across both measures. As you guys can see here, of course, he did say back in February that Switch 2 came in second place as well. So PS5 won November, January, and February, 3 of the last 4 months, okay? Now we'll see with March. Surely the Switch 2 will come in first place in March because of Pokopia, obviously. Frankly, it would be shocking if Switch 2 doesn't come in first place for March. But again, I have to go back to the same point of, first of all, the price cut in November was not really a price cut. It's the same price as the PS5 was back at launch. It's the same price as always, right? It's not even the lowest price it's ever been, by the way. The PS5 had previously been at lower prices than that. And also PS5 outsold in January, outsold in February. All the data is pointing towards the Switch 2 being a little bit disappointing right now in the United States. Kotaku goes on to say, if anything, it's Pokemon that's preventing this situation from being any worse. Pokemon Legends EA gave the console something to push towards the end of 2025, and Pokopia has performed a lot better than expected over the last month. Yet neither appears to have been enough to prop up the planned production. Bloomberg quotes strategist Amir Anvarzada, sorry if I mispronounced that, of Asymmetric Advisors, where he said, quote, this hardware shortfall in its first year during its big holiday season is awful news, end quote, adding, quote, clearly the software lineup has been poor. Again, it's like it's exciting and also frustrating to be reading this, because I've been saying this for months and the Nintendo fans just call me a grifter, a hater, or whatever, and yet finally, okay, the rest of the gaming news outlets are finally like, welcome to the party, you're 2 months late but I'll accept it. But it's still frustrating that I've had to like get so much pushback from people that just simply don't know what's going on, right? They're just looking at Japan, or they're looking at what they want to see, and they are missing what's right in front of their face, right? Average consumers are not buying Metroid Prime 4, they're not buying Kirby Air Riders, at least in the United States. It's just not happening. Maybe they'll buy it in a year or two if the price goes down and they get a Switch 2 for some other reason, but it's not a reason to buy a Switch 2. Now again, Pokopia will change this for March. Pokopia, we will see the numbers for Switch 2 be very elevated in March because of Pokopia. It's been a success. I said it would be a success. We all know that. And despite that, we still see these reports of the Switch 2 cutting production by 30%. Okay. What that means is, you know, Pokopia might be just a blip on the radar, right? Yes, it is an expected or maybe even unexpected success from Nintendo's perspective, but they're looking at that and saying, okay, well, it's succeeded, but we don't have anything that we think is going to do as well as that over the next 6 months, right? Like that's what cutting production means, really. Like if they thought they had more Pokopia style game or console sellers over the next 6 to 9 to 12 months, they probably wouldn't cut production, but they are. So I think that's kind of like the canary in the coal mine here. If you read between the lines, I don't think we're getting a 3D Mario this year, y'all. I hope we do. Okay. I hope we do, but I don't think we are. If we were, I don't think they'd be cutting production. Nintendo operates famously privately, and leaks of what is being worked on are surprisingly rare. So there's no hint of exactly why the Switch 2 launched with a completely wonderful Donkey Kong title instead of a new Super Mario, nor any notion of how the company plans to follow The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Just knowing either was coming would surely enormously hike up interest in the hybrid console in a situation not helped by the seeming 2-year delay in the arrival of a new mainline Pokemon. It's also odd to note just how much Mario Kart World seems to have faded into the background, with few major updates across the overly familiar game's first year. And this is another huge point, okay? And I've seen this firsthand when my girlfriend decided to buy the Switch 2 for Pokopia. And yes, she bought it specifically for Pokopia. She loves Animal Crossing, she loves Pokemon, and she's been having a blast with Pokopia, so I don't blame her for doing that, right? I've actually loved watching her play, because it just brings me so much joy to see how much she loves the game, right? It's fantastic. But when she was looking to get a Switch 2, she was trying to decide if she should get the Mario Kart World bundle, which is still available, by the way. I know they cut production months ago, but yes, it's still on shelves. Okay, she was deciding between that and a regular Switch 2 without a bundled game, and she was like, well, I don't really even like Mario Kart World. She's played Mario Kart World a bunch, and she said it's fine, but she actually prefers Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, which she has on the Switch 1. And so she was kind of looking at the price difference, and she's like, well, if I want to play Mario Kart, I have Mario Kart. I can just play Mario Kart 8 on the Switch 2. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of true, actually. Like, I mean, really, as somebody who, you know, she plays Mario Kart only a couple of times a year when she visits family, or when her and I play in the living room together, like every couple of months. So for her, like the $50 extra for Mario Kart World just wasn't even worth it. She's like, Mario Kart 8's better anyway, so I'll just go with that. And I think that is kind of, a lot of people are in that boat, especially in the casual audience. They're like, well, it's not that much better, really, if at all. Some people think it's worse, right? And so that was supposed to be like the big game, and like by all metrics it technically is. It is actually the best-selling game on the Switch 2, but we all know it's because it's bundled, right? How many people would actually fork up $80 for Mario Kart World? I think plenty, but certainly not as many as have been sold already because of that bundle. So even Mario Kart World, for a lot of people, isn't really part of the equation when it comes to Nintendo actually spending the money on the Switch 2, because it kind of came and went, right? Whereas Mario Kart 8 Deluxe has been going strong for years. People really love that game, and something about Mario Kart World was just a miss for a lot of the casual audience. And like, I know the hardcore Mario Kart players are really into all the technical maneuvers and things that you can do, but I don't think the casual audience really caught on there. The article concludes by saying this is by no means a disaster, and the Switch 2 has sold extremely well. Nintendo still looks set to hit its target of 20 million sales over the first year, and its initial performance gave the company a big head start. But right now the graphs are pointing in the wrong direction, and it feels like something needs to happen pretty soon to prevent this getting worse. That is like verbatim what I've been saying for months, bro. I've said that the console is doing well, but the trajectory is the problem, okay? And this is the thing, like, it's not that complicated, which is why I've been so confused as to why everyone's just calling me a hater. I'm just looking at the trajectory, guys. That's what we're talking about here. It's not that complicated. Even Polygon closed their article by saying, as Bloomberg says, a console's second year on the market is crucial to establishing its momentum, and Nintendo's GTA 6 counter programming will be vital. Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave, wonderful as it may be, is not going to cut it. It will be fascinating to see what else Nintendo has planned, and everyone again is on the edge of their seat waiting for that next Nintendo Direct, because everyone knows Fire Emblem is not enough to compete with GTA 6, and frankly Nintendo doesn't have anything that can compete with GTA 6. They would have to release a 3D Mario and Pokemon Winds and Waves and Fire Emblem and probably Splatoon if they want to have a fighting chance this holiday season, and the most crucial of those straight up are not coming, or at least very unlikely. Let's take a look at the comments over on Kotaku to see what people are saying about this. This user says, it's a shame, but with the jobs market and cost of living, I just don't have the disposable income right now to justify the purchase, and I suspect I'm not alone. I bought a Steam Deck 3 years ago as a stopgap to Switch 2, as I'm a big Nintendo fan when things were a lot rosier for me financially, but until the killer app comes down and my situation improves, I simply can't get one. Yeah, I think this is almost everybody who's on the sidelines up for the Switch 2 are in one of those two camps, if not both, right? And right now, both seems like the case for a lot of people. They don't have a reason to get it, and they can't afford it anyway, so they just don't have one. This user says, as an owner of the OLED Switch, I didn't see a need to upgrade until recently, but what has kept me from doing so as an American buyer has 100% been Trump's tariffs / the AI bubble and the effects they have on the console. There is a genuine wonder if the price of the units will go down substantially once common sense prevails, if it ever does, but wallets are tight and the Switch 2 comes off more as an upgrade than a new generation right now. I wish we could get the treatment Nintendo gave to their native Japanese, but thanks to the tariff idiocy and uncertainty, we were left high and dry. Now look, I'm gonna just come out and say it, the Switch 2 price was unchanged after the tariffs, okay? So I want to just push back a little bit here. Obviously tariffs did objectively raise the price of a lot of things, including accessories and the previous Switch, amiibos, things like that, and that may have even played a factor in Nintendo's decision making when it comes to the price of like DLC, for example, or charging $5 for the Animal Crossing upgrade on Switch 2, right? That could have easily been 0, but they chose 5, maybe to offset some of the tariff pressure. So, you know, not to say tariffs have had no effect on the Switch 2, but the Switch 2 itself was priced at $450 and has remained that price the entire time. And so far, the AI bubble hasn't hit Nintendo yet, but it is probably going to hit them next quarter, if not the quarter after. This user says, yes, a lack of support will have an effect on console sales. You know what else? Exorbitant gas prices, 1/3 of a shopping cart costing $200, mortgages that are out of control. Impending societal collapse notwithstanding, if Nintendo wants to move consoles, they need to stop being so close-minded and start bringing more third-party developers on and letting them handle their IPs. That's kind of crazy. It's probably never gonna happen, right? I mean, like, would I love a From Software Legend of Zelda? Absolutely, right? Like, that would be, oh bro, oh bro, that would be insane. That was one of the first things I texted my buddy when I beat Elden Ring back in December. I was like, can you imagine, bro, if they had a From Software Legend of Zelda, dude? Not that I don't love, you know, for example, Breath of the Wild was fantastic, right? And I love all the Zelda. The only Zelda recently that I haven't really enjoyed was Tears of the Kingdom, unfortunately. I loved Ocarina of Time. I loved Wind Waker even. That was one of my favorite Zeldas. Of course, Twilight Princess was incredible, but I still would love to see what From Software could do with a Zelda title. Anyway, this user says, well, of course it's selling better in Japan. That's what happens when you price the system as a loss leader like the old days and don't make a profit every unit. And they're referring to the fact that it is literally literally significantly cheaper to buy the console in Japan, and historically Nintendo has sort of broken even on every console in order to sell more units, and the Switch 2 I don't think is the case. They make a small profit on every unit, at least in the United States, I believe. This user says, honestly, I have an OG Switch and I have a massive backlog to play through, so I am at the point where unless a new gen has something genuinely unique about it, I don't see a reason to upgrade. This past gen has had good games, but nothing that ever really felt impressive to make for the previous gen, so I think it's time for me to skip a gen and just work on my backlog. I think a lot of people are in this position, whether it's because they don't want to spend the money or they can't. I mean, they're just not convinced, right? And one of the craziest things about all of this is that it's only been just over a month since it was reported that Nintendo can't seem to decide if it will raise Switch 2 prices. The RAM crisis is pushing video game hardware makers to reassess release dates and price points. Last week, Nintendo president Shuntaro Furukawa told shareholders that the House of Mario had no current plans to raise the price of its $450 Switch 2. This week, it sounds like Nintendo isn't just considering a price increase for the console, it is reportedly weighing when it will enact a price hike. In a Q&A investor call, Furukawa tried to quell investor concern over the RAM crisis, which is threatening to impact nearly every industry that uses computer chips. As many are well aware, the AI industry is eating up resources like water, energy, and tech availability. OpenAI alone has already secured 40% of the world's future semiconductor supply, which has ramifications for companies like Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft. 1 week later, a report by Bloomberg claims that Nintendo is, quote, contemplating raising the price of that device in 2026, end quote. The console, which currently sits at $450, is powered by chips that are technically less capable than its contemporaries. This would potentially mean that Nintendo will be charging consumers even more money for an already outdated machine, right? And that's the thing, like, they're gonna raise the price, and what, the PS5 is still gonna be stronger than it, so you're paying for the portability and the fact that it's just got Nintendo IP, right? Like, and then, like, for some people that is worth it for sure, but like, really, when it comes down to it, it is a tough sell for a lot of the casual audience. Given the trajectory and mass adoption of AI, things are only going to get worse. Many of us raised our eyebrows at the people who shelled out $1,000 for a PS5 back in 2020. A few years from now, that might be around the price everyone has to pay. Already, a new Xbox Series X can set you back around that much when you factor in taxes, accessories, games, and subscriptions. I actually was out to dinner with a buddy of mine who is deeply involved in AI, and he was telling me at dinner, he kind of was joking. He was like, yeah, you're gonna buy a house before you buy another computer. And I was like, I know you're kidding, but like, it's actually kind of that bad. Like, the joke is millennials and those of us in our 30s and 40s will never buy a house, right? Especially those of you in your 20s. And AI is ensuring that computer components are just so expensive. Not only expensive, but just you can't get them. They're just being bought as they're being manufactured. So for those of you not paying attention to the AI situation, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but yeah, these things are real. They are happening, and it's not just, you know, doom and gloom for YouTube title and thumbnail sake. Like, this is the reality we live in right now, and it's vindicating, frankly, that this news has finally caught up to what I've been saying for months now. And so if you guys want the latest breaking news when it comes to Nintendo and how the Switch 2 is doing months before the rest of the industry, apparently, make sure you subscribe to the channel down below. Some of you have told me that YouTube has actually unsubbed you from my channel, so double check to make sure you're subscribed down below. And while you're down there, drop a thumbs up on the video. It really does help out the channel a ton. And with that being said, guys, thank you so much for watching. This has been Omniarch. I'll talk to you guys again soon. Peace.